G'day folks, wherever you're joining us from for the Wednesday webcast with Mike. As you know, we started talking about tactics and strategies for dealing with COVID when we were in crisis management mode, and we've moved sideways slightly to be looking more at how do we live life well regardless of our circumstances, and continue to deal with the emerging problem of COVID around the world as we move into more of a recovery phase here in Australia. We're acutely aware that some of our guests in places like the Philippines and the US and parts of Europe are still deep in it and really in the peak of crisis management mode still. And if that's you, then some of the earlier recordings from this series might be really useful. So wherever you're coming in from, welcome. And we really appreciate you being here, whether it's live or catching us via a recording somewhere and somehow. My guest today is Matthew Bruce, and I'm really excited to be talking with Matthew. It's one of those fortuitous connections. I was in an Uber listening to ABC radio. I don't even normally tune in to ABC, and I heard this great interview with Matthew talking about his new book, and I thought, I've got to connect with this guy. And so I threw a quick lure into the water to see if he wanted to join us for the call. And Matt very kindly has agreed. So Matt, first of all, I'd just like to say welcome and thanks for your service, for your 10 years of military service, for the service that you've done to yourself and the community in dealing with post-traumatic stress coming out of that, and also for the service that you provide now in helping others navigate that territory and working towards robust mental health. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate time to be here and really excited about today's chat. Yeah.
Good stuff. So maybe just give us a little bit of background as a beginning. That's probably a good place to start. Tell us a bit about you and your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a soldier in the Australian Army for 10 years, served on multiple tours overseas, so Afghanistan, support staff member with the SAS for a number of years, served in places like Jordan, even went on operations to the Philippines June. So worked with the Filipino Special Forces on a trip as well there too. So yeah, very kind of fast-paced life for a number of years. Very similar to modern society, always kind of go and moving very quickly within the military. And then I guess after a number of deployments and time, that really took its toll. So I really struggled to integrate back into civilian life, and I was diagnosed with PTSD and major depression. And my nervous system, my mind was severely burnt out, and I had a level of emotional baggage and trauma that I really hadn't dealt with. On leaving the military, I joined working in the mining industry. So I worked for Gina Rinehart's mining company, Roy Hill. I was based in Perth. I was building autonomous mining solutions and that kind of busy corporate lifestyle. And I could really see some of the synergies between the military and the busy corporate space and some of the burnout that people are suffering within their nervous system and the effects that was having on our mental health as well too. So in me coming through PTSD and healing myself, I've now work for an organisation called the Happiness Co, so Preventative Mental Health Organisation. I think we've worked with about 80,000 people in the last 3 years. My boss is a pretty incredible guy, nominated for Australian of the Year award. We come from that place of learned experience and then bringing our learned experience into corporate, into online programs and around Australia to kind of help shape people's mental health from a preemptive perspective now. And that's really passionate to me, is to, what can we do as a society to look at the preemptive approach to mental health rather than saving people when they're in the red.
Yeah, that's so critical, isn't it? And this is a little bit of a rabbit hole potentially, but I'll ask the question anyway. I was talking to another guy a few calls back around mental health, and he was particularly diving into the territory of stigma and how challenging that makes it to get really decent preventative work done. What's your take on that and how we potentially can lower that?
Yeah, absolutely. So PTSD is a really big one, Mike. We're talking about depression and mental health and removing the stigma around that. But then trauma is a whole nother big kettle of, it's a whole problem in itself.
Mm.
And 12%, Beyond Blue say that 12% of Australians will have PTSD at some point in their life. 2/3 of them will go undiagnosed.
Wow.
So 2/3 of 3.5 million people that are out there that are living with trauma. If you go into America, like Doug, there's 20 million people per year that are suffering from PTSD within the USA just through domestic violence. And that's just domestic violence. That's 20 million people a year that are having some form of relationship trauma and suffering some form of PTSD just in America on that topic alone. So, trauma is quite a widespread. It's not just for veterans. It's for somebody. For the CEO that's knocked off their push bike and has their fight or flight system activated and can't relax and can't come back into the normal state. Or it's for somebody who is grieving the loss of a loved one but couldn't actually have the emotional space or capacity or tools to get through that. And then that becomes traumatic in itself as well too. So trauma's everywhere. There's definitely a lot of stigma around trauma. And then people actually being vulnerable enough and enough spaces existing for people to kind of open up to doing the work and taking individual responsibility for their mental health.
So individual responsibility, that's a really interesting topic as well, I reckon. It's, there's a heap of evidence that says at one level, some of this territory is about perception and, how you frame your experience, what you make it mean. That's simultaneously, I think, a really powerful thing to realise, but also potentially hazardous. And I reckon the power is that gives us a huge amount of agency to kind of frame whatever we're facing and however we see it in different and more positive ways. But I reckon around mental health, it potentially runs us into the risk of just saying, well, all you've got to do, mate, is get yourself an attitude adjustment. And, Australians are pretty good already at that sort of mindset that says, just go down to Bunnings and buy a bucket of Harden Up, which is obviously not helpful. How do we create that kind of space where people can take responsibility and provide the sort of supports around them that make it really useful and effective?
Yeah. So I'd say that businesses probably have a bit of a responsibility. If we look at like industrial age and the invention of time and us actually taking time off an individual to give them to receive money and basically the effects that that's had on the modern population. And as we're actually extracting, time from an employee and services, that there's a level of stress and duress that's placing on our nervous system. And we can see that over, the last 100 years, that's not going too well as a society. We're kind of, our nervous system, our mental health and all of these things are declining very quickly. So I guess, in that extraction of skills and services from individuals as a business, we then kind of have a duty of care to, open up these spaces to look at mental health. Yes, no one can ever change a person's mental health. Yes, it is an individual journey. But then from a business perspective, we have that duty of care to open up these conversations and open up and equip champions within the business to actually make some authentic change, some real change. And, I guess that can be looked at as a bit of a strain on businesses, but some really amazing statistics out there around Beyond Blue also saying that, $1 invested in preventive mental health is $5 in return for the business, which is huge.
Wow, 1 in 5.
Yeah, massive amounts of study of an individual who has depression. So you can be an individual that has depression that rocks up to work. The amount of productivity loss that you have as a person that has depression, the inability to remain present, to be focused, is huge. Like massive numbers. You're talking like 30% loss as an employee on your productivity without even including absenteeism off just depression alone. So you think of all of the mental health conditions that exist across Australia and the loss of productivity, when you can spend $1 in the preemptive department, how much time you can save for people that are in these states of depression or trauma or whatever it is that's existing. So yeah, it's a fine line between individual and collective, and the responsibility that exists between a person and a business. But when those are kind of working together, well, then we have the best impact and the best outcome, I reckon.
Yeah, nice. So what does individual responsibility look like? What does taking responsibility for it look like?
I think some really good examples of that I've seen, like in business at the moment, there's a place called Interactive IT. So they're one of the leading IT service providers across Australia, and they have an amazing, they're an amazing place to work. And they offer amazing services. They've got a really good HR team, and so what they've done is they've opened up a space within the business to then allow individual responsibility to come forward. And they've got a really strong champion within the leadership team, Scott, who is basically hosting men's circles and men vulnerability sessions for men to come forward and to communicate within the business, and for people to get to know each other better, for people to express what they're doing and start to break down some of these stigmas. So, that is individual responsibility in its nutshell, is just having the courage to show up to something within your local community that is going to allow you to express or move through something or be a better version of yourself, and just making that choice to move towards something that you wouldn't normally do. And open up our eyes. They're everywhere. Like we can be lucky enough that they do exist in our business, but there are men's circles or women's groups or all these things that from an individual perspective that exist everywhere around us at the moment. You just got to go into your phone and download one of about 5,000 apps that exist for preventative mental health. So yeah.
Nice. What's the process of it? It would be really individual, I imagine, but the process of coming back from PTSD to a place of being balanced and healthy and robust again. I imagine that looks different for every person, but is there any sort of typical elements of what that looks like?
Yeah. So that was a good example of individual responsibility of, realizing that, I went in to see a psychiatrist, and he said, here's a script. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And in that moment, I knew that I had to take individual responsibility. And so a radical responsibility through changing my diet, through stop drinking alcohol, meditating, and basically had to audit my life, which can be pretty difficult to do when you're in like very extenuating circumstances. Ultimately, it's that individual responsibility looks at what is working for me in my life and what's not. And then, how can I move towards a better version of myself? How can I make healthy, grounded choices to remove the elements that are not working for me to get towards? And, basically just comes down to having a healthy choice in the moment, and having that ability to make those towards a happy, healthy, balanced person who's not stressed and can be present and enjoy the best things of life. Yeah.
So I reckon there's an interesting distinction there that you just made, which is, when you're deep in it, when you're under duress, it's difficult to actually face what you need to face and do the work. And that, I think that's true anytime we're experiencing stress, when we're sort of got that sense of being overwhelmed and pushed a little bit past our edge or way over it. In that moment, trying to make sense of it and what we can take control of and not, it's quite difficult. So the more proactive and smarter thing to do really is kind of clean house as you go. But I know for me, one of the things I'm really inclined to do is go, later, all those things can wait. And, healthy exercise and meditation and eating well and all of those kinds of things, they're really easy to push out at arm's length because none of the results are immediate. Whereas I can, tick 3 things off a to-do list, for example, and it's like, right, I've nailed that. So there seems to be this constant sort of balancing act between doing the stuff that'll serve you well in the long term and responding to the immediate whack-a-mole game that's going on in front of you. What's your thoughts around that, and how do you manage that yourself personally?
Yeah, great question, Mike. It comes back to dopamine. You know, the world is like one big dopamine addiction these days. So whether it's your mobile phone or coffee, or, you know, there's some really cool science out there called wanting versus liking. And wanting is being basically in a dopamine reward system. So you wake up in the morning and you're already craving a substance from the day before.
Mm.
You have unlimited potentials of how your day could play out, but you want to go have a coffee because you had a coffee yesterday and it made you feel good, you know, and that you're taking the reward system and bring it into the present moment. So, you know, when we're in this dopamine reward system and in this cycle, can really limit our opportunity to do the things that are the best for us. So we kind of become a slave to this reward system, which is, you know, chocolate or Netflix or all of these things that give us these dopamine hits. And when you can actually understand how the mind works and how it's actually leading us down the wrong path, then we can actually start to do some pretty cool hacks to get us onto the other one. One of them is kind of just witnessing why the mind doesn't want to meditate. And ultimately, the reason that we're using dopamine, the reason that we're so busy in this modern world is because we have emotional trauma, we have baggage, we have stuff from our past that we haven't identified with, that we haven't processed, or, you know, the world is a pretty stressful place. So it is a lot easier for us to go towards dopamine, which allows us to not honor some of our emotional processes and stress and the state of our actual nervous system, versus actually learning how to meditate and actually honoring that and facing what can come up. So yeah, great question.
So let's have a chat about learning how to meditate. That's you know, I've got a reasonable meditation practice. I wouldn't say that I'm quite as disciplined as every single day, but I get there most days. And you certainly notice the impact of that when you really get into the practice and create the space for it regularly. How much it has the capacity to slow my mind down, connect me with how I'm physically and emotionally feeling, make more reasoned choices through the day, be a bit less reactive. And there's loads of research and evidence that is basically a growing body of work about how powerful meditation is as a practice. Something that, you know, many cultures and traditions have known for thousands of years, and science is now saying, yep, they're onto something there. A lot of the people I speak to, when we talk about meditation as a practice, particularly action-oriented people who are already busy, there's this sense of, well, how do I do it? And if you say to them, well, that, you know, there's lots of different ways, but a couple of the fundamentals are just sit there and pay attention to your breathing, or watch a candle, for example. And they'll sit there for a couple of seconds and then they're like, yeah, but what do you want me to do? And it's like, you're doing it, just watch your breathing. It's like, yeah, but what do you want me to do? And there's this compulsion, twitchiness to rush off and do something. If someone's just starting out, how do they, what are some tactics, I guess, to break through that initial resistance and that sort of temptation to rush off and do something that feels more productive?
Yeah, big question, and I could probably talk to like 1,000 points in that one. But so I'll try and keep it a little bit narrow. Firstly, you know, identify that the mind wants to be busy. That's the whole basis of the mind. So when your mind is trying to tell you to stop meditating, just realize that that's the mind, and just be like, okay, all right, I get that my mind wants me to go do something, but I'm making this time for myself to actually, you know, go against the trends that exist within the modern world. And, you know, let's be honest, there's not one elite sports person or probably one elite person in business these days that isn't using meditation. So if you think that you're at your best performing self without meditation, I guarantee you that you're not. That's factual. Literally, the amount of benefits that exist through meditation is beyond. It's beyond. It's beyond anything I can explain in the next 2 minutes. But ultimately, you know, it's been so powerful in me healing PTSD, a condition that, you know, people have gone on to suffer with trauma for 30 years. A condition that people say that it can't be cured. A condition that sees people just sit on the pension for most of their life, and meditation was the gateway for me to be able to move through that. So meditation is huge. How to actually do it? One, have a positive story with meditation. So, you know, we're talking about the reward system and how that works in the mind. If we actually have a positive reward system, positive story around meditation, we can actually buy into that reward loop. So every time you meditate, you say, I love meditation. It makes me feel amazing. It's the greatest thing under the sun. Then you're actually releasing endorphin, serotonin, and you're actually creating a positive reward loop around meditation in itself. So that's first hack, number one. Don't sit down and say it's hard. I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, because then you've got like a disempowering story. So, you know, the story that you tell yourself is huge. That really matters around meditation. Also identifying that, you know, meditation is actually like a 3,000 or 4,000 year old technology. So it's kind of like trying to run an app on your 3310 smartphone. So yes, the 3310 was fit for purpose many years ago, as was meditation. But just with the speed of modern technology, with, you know, all of the demands that we have within our nervous system in the modern world, meditation isn't always going to cut it. So you're going to have to maybe do more of an active-based meditation beforehand to really have a huge impact on your nervous system. So something like a deep breath work kind of breathing technique before you go into your meditation would be the difference between you actually receiving a level of stillness and then not receiving a level of stillness. And probably another last one too is like understanding another principle of the mind of, you know, if you're searching for something, we'll never find it. So we always know that lady who's always looking for love, and she's like picking up, you know, is there love under here? Is there love under there? Or, you know, if you go to the shop and you're looking for that perfect jacket and you're like, no, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's the nature of the mind. So if you're very, very desperately or searching for stillness or looking for a place of peace in meditation and you're actively looking for it, you'll never find that as well too, because the mind will be active looking for, you know, what is it that I'm looking for? What is this stillness? Is this stillness? Is this present? Am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? So yeah, there are a few kind of like pro tips to allow you to, you know, understand the nature of the mind. And you know, that's what meditation is coming back into that stillness, understanding ourselves better, and then allowing us to, you know, apply that in everyday situations. So, you know, meditation is literally just training your brain in a certain way. And then that allows us to take that from, you know, our meditation practice and apply that into many, many, many relationships that we can use in the world around us. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Some great tips there. I particularly like that piece about if you're looking for stillness, you know, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? That's pretty much the opposite. Yeah, gold. Personally, one of the places that I find really useful too, and you don't necessarily have to be in a really remote spot for this, but just anywhere where you've got a bit of connection to nature. That's kind of a nice interim step, I find, between, you know, sitting and trying to apply yourself to something that's deeply still, to just spend time tuning in very mindfully, observing what's happening around you. So the sounds and the sights and the smells and all of that's going on in a piece of bush or your backyard or a park is a nice kind of interim step as well.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Like, environment's everything. We know, like, from a business perspective, if we surround ourselves with the best leaders, that we can, you know, really propel our career. We know that if we have a great bunch of friends that you know, they're going to be an amazing support system for us as well too. And then we're actually trying to find relaxation and stillness. The environment of nature it goes hand in hand there. So yeah, environment for what you're trying to achieve is everything. And yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, beautiful. So we've talked a little bit about stress, and you know, one of the patterns that we've probably both observed, you've certainly talked a bit about it so far, is, you know, we're in this cycle of really perpetual busyness, rushing from one thing to another. And it seems like, you know, everyone I've spoken to recently pretty much says it's a standard experience now that the inbox fills faster than you can clear it. The to-do list grows quicker than you can tick stuff off. And there's this sort of constant drive, go, never switch off. And, you know, some of our technology doesn't help that either. The fact that we can be, you know, dialing in and tapping into lists and emails and things anytime, anywhere, pretty much. How do we create space in all of that, and why is that important?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it comes back to boundaries, Mike. You know, if we're setting boundaries and we're able to not check our phone past a certain time at night, it actually allows us to be more rested, to be at a higher level of performance, that when we actually come into work the next day and we show up, we're showing up in a higher capacity. So the level of work that we'll output and the impact and the co-creation and all these things will be at a higher productivity level. So that level of having a boundary is huge, because it allows us to, you know, have rest, basically, to not always be turned on. And, you know, we're pretty binary in a sense of, we're just like a computer. It's a 1 or a 0. And how we actually turn off is, you know, by having those boundaries of what's my time, what's work's time, you know, how can I actually separate myself from that busyness and know that I'm going to be okay. You know, we think I can't check that email, or I can't reply to that because, you know, I'm not going to be accepted in the workplace, or I'm not going to get a gold star, or I'm not going to be validated. But a lot of that's an illusion normally, and that we can actually set those healthy boundaries. And often that's what we actually need to do as leaders. So if you are within the business and you are one of those people that's rolling from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you're identifying with the term busy, you're actually setting your workers up for failure. You're not actually displaying a high level of boundaries, and you're probably not taking care of your mental health as good as how you would like your employees to. And I had a really good example of this in a previous career, where I watched my general manager, you know, eat a kebab and a can of Coke each day, jump from meeting to meeting to meeting, and wonder why her blood pressure was through the roof and she was red as a beetroot in her face. And you can clearly see that she's on a trajectory to having some form of health problem and some form of mental health problem at any moment. So, you know, if we are in those leadership positions and we are in that perpetual cycle of busyness, we need to really actually, you know, come back to a place of leadership, speak our truth to our bosses above us, and stand in our power to create some boundaries, and try and change, you know, try and get our business to adjust. And, you know, power in numbers. The more people that stand up and have those healthy boundaries and are looking after themselves, and if, you know, they are happening at leadership levels, then the easier we can change that. We can have a better change of culture within Australian business, which, you know, sometimes is about, you know, working harder or cutting things versus actually, you know, the long-term gain, where we can actually invest in the health and well-being of our employees to get the long-term productivity. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. My guest last week, Professor Gary Martin, who's CEO at AIM, he observes a lot in terms of workplace trends, and he said, you know, we've got this narrative about do more with less, and he said that it's just not true. You do less with less. That's the reality of it. But we keep on turning the screw and expecting that we're going to be able to wring more out of the stone. So we've talked stress a bit, and it's you know, Yerkes Dodson way back in the 70s came up with the stress curve. Before they spoke about that, there was a sense that stress was just always bad, and they were some of the first researchers to kind of say, no, it's a bell curve. You know, if there's too little, we're basically bored, disengaged, not really motivated. There's that sort of optimal level in the middle where we're in a flow state and we're getting some challenge, but we're in our capability to operate well. And then if we tip over the edge, we get into overwhelm and ultimately burnout. So people, and sometimes we're acutely aware of that. You know, I know there's been times in my life, it's like I've I'm over the hump, you know, I'm definitely on the downhill slope here and things are not going well, and I need to actively take some measures to try and control that and get myself back onto a more even keel. One of the things I'm really acutely aware of is that stress, you're not necessarily aware of how stressed you are. There's loads of things that show up at a physiological level that are outside of our conscious awareness, where people are often burning levels of stress, and they're not in that kind of noticeable overwhelm or burnout feeling, but they're definitely knocking hard on the door. Have you got some tips for people about kind of navigating that and getting a bit of a sense of where they're at? And because that's a good starting point, isn't it? If I'm aware of what my levels are like, then I'm more able to do something about it.
Yeah, agreed. I'd say, you know, life and that center of the bell curve is all about balance. If you see yourself working hard but resting, that's okay, that's balance. But if you see yourself or excess showing up in any part of your life, how you do anything is normally how you do everything. So if you see that you're quite excessive in some areas of your life, that, you know, that might be a bit of a window. So let's just say coffee, for example. If you're, you know, usually drinking 1 or 2 coffees a day, and then you find yourself drinking 5 or 6 coffees a day, you know, that's that excess part. If you found yourself going for a ride on your push bike to have a healthy balance or a healthy outlet for stress, and you were riding 10 kilometers, and now, you know, you're constantly doing 100 kilometers as hard as you can, and you're excess in that regard. Or even alcohol. You know, let's be honest, Australian, that's a pretty big pastime from a stress perspective as well too, that, you know, you're religiously going out for the Friday night drinks with the work colleagues, regardless of what other circumstances you might have on within your family or other bits and pieces, that, you know, those are kind of the red flags that can show up in society that, you know, we might actually have some underlying stress and something that we're not really dealing with. So I guess that kind of balance and that center point is showing us where we are in alignment. We are healthy. If anything else is showing up excessively, even, you know, food or junk food or all these things, you know, that might be a place for you to start asking the questions like, you know, what's going on below this excessive activity? You know, is this related to stress? You know, one of the things we talk about in the Happiness Code is a stress audit. So we start to actually break down all of the places within our life that we can have stress. So whether it be nutritional, emotional, physical, environmental, identify what our stresses are, and then look at some coping mechanisms or some actions we can take to start to eliminate stress as well too. So, yeah.
And is that audit as simple as just having a bit of a reflection and thinking about it, and say, you know, if I think about physical stress, am I going to be a reliable source of truth around that, or am I likely to be missing bits because they're outside my awareness, or I'm keen to delude myself?
Yeah, probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
I'd probably say, you know, Google happinessco.org and get us in for a workshop or a session, and we'll help you with those blind spots.
Yeah.
But yeah, under 100%, you know, sitting down and, you know, even going through with a loved one can be really good, or a co-worker, and work together, because they can, you know, give you some of the blind spots, give them the permission to call you out on some of that stuff. And by starting to, you know, break down, our physical stress, our environmental stress. But I think a big part of it is, you know, what are our behaviors on the other side of stress? So when we start to, all right, we identify that stress is something that part of life, that's part of the modern world. You know, you said that it's healthy to have cortisol and adrenaline through your body is how we stay engaged. But by identifying when it's excessive or there's too much of it, then it's like, what are the actions that we're going to take? You know, we've lived in a awareness campaigns for the last 5 to 10 years around mental health, and now the time is to take action. So awareness is the first step, but then start to take some action over the stuff that you actually start to become aware of, and then how can you limit some of the stress within your life? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Do you reckon this is something that I've been kind of working around? I'm writing a book at the moment called Unshakable, which is basically about building individuals and organisations and teams that are less disruptable. And one of the things I'm contemplating is basically that stress curve. You know, can you build for yourself at an individual level capacity to handle a broader range of stress, or things that could be seen as stressful, and just to be able to deal with it. And I'm kind of curious on your take on that, because at one level, that's basically what the military does, right? It exposes you to a whole heap of things that an everyday punter off the street would find deeply distressing and difficult to deal with. Loud noises, getting shot at, you know, having to make rapid fire decisions that are literally life and death. And over the course of training, you can skill someone up to be able to deal with those in a pretty methodical way. And we also see that the end result of that for a lot of people is post-traumatic stress and other experiences. Is it realistic to say we can broaden what we're capable of handling? Or is that just a nice delusion to say, let's get even busier?
No, I agree that we can. Yeah. You know, and I think it comes down to a level of, probably vulnerability and a sense of community within business. In a sense of, all right, we understand that each individual is going to have the highs and lows as on an individual level. So then, you know, by you putting a load of processes that have that person as a failure point as they're moving up and down, you know, then you basically then have offsets, and everyone else is going to be performing at the rate of this person in the down cycle. So I guess it's kind of about, you know, really making it aware within business that people are going to go through these, cycles of life, and that we are going through struggles, emotions, and all these things. And then by having more of a community sense where we're kind of working together and supporting one another and identifying that people are going to move through stuff, how then can we, support them in that time to move through it quicker? You know, how can we acknowledge that somebody is going through something, and then how do we support them as an organisation to move through that quicker, and create that level of, teamwork and community and those things where we're feeling supported by the business so we can move forward. And, you touched on the military. We do it pretty well. We have that teamwork. We have that we can overcome any challenge and every obstacle. And, ultimately what the real challenge and obstacle is for business in the modern age is, this nervous system and emotional stress and mental health. And this is, a global challenge at the moment. So we need to really reinvent the way we operate at a business level, as an individual level, to actually make ourselves robust in business. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
And it comes from sharing the load in the down and the up, basically. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need help. I'm not able to do this at the moment because I'm going through this cycle. Yeah. I'm up here. Let me help you. Let me take on more because I'm actually feeling good, and I'm in the up. And then, how can we look at the cycles of this within individuals, within business? And, if we think that we can operate at red line, if you're a Ferrari and you're a Formula One car, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on that engine and how much time and attention and effort. If you're running that in the red, it's just going to blow up. Human beings are no different. But they will drive that engine to a certain point, and then they'll let it cool off, and they will, run measures and statistics on it and get the most out of the engine. And, ultimately people are no different in a sense of, understanding how far we can not so much get maximum resources out of them, but just understand the natural cycles that exist within some people. And that some people are different as well too.
Yeah, nice. Matt, it's been a wide-ranging and interesting conversation, and it felt like just about every one of those topics we could have devoted 40 minutes to that all on its own. I'm sure people listening either live or to the recording would be interested in finding out more about you, your book, The Warrior's War, and the Happiness Co, and the various bits of work that you do. How can people track you down?
Yeah, so warriorswar.com.au is the book. You can find me on LinkedIn at Matthew Bruce as well too, just like you found me and shot me a message there. and just Matt at happinessco.org as well too. Yeah, Happiness Co is an amazing organisation. We're working with, you know, probably the top 50 businesses in Australia at the moment as well too, whether it's like, you know, Sodexo. We just had a massive shout out from the Sodexo CEO on LinkedIn the other day as well too. So we're doing some like really amazing work with the top tier businesses within Australia in the preemptive mental health space. So yeah, Happiness Co, you can find us, or Matt at happinessco.org.
Awesome. Thanks very much, mate. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Very well. Thanks, Mike. I really enjoyed it as well too. Yeah, happy to be back in any future Zoom. So just let me know.
All right. Thanks very much, mate.